That's me. That's my Uncle Alf.
But you look different.
Well, I was different.
With your hair, now you had it up to here, now you have it up to there.
Yeah, I know. It's disappearing.
What
That-
picture's that?
That was when Alf came over. That was Kath's 80th birthday
Okay, in Toronto.
in Toronto, Mississauga, yeah.
Daddy, look. Grandad was Santa Claus.
Granddad was Santa Claus. I see.
Yeah.
Huh.
I've still got the suit.
Yeah. I see. Here, put that back there, Alex.
Okay.
So, guys, I'm just asking about Granddad when he was a little boy, when he was your age. Do you know where
Yeah.
Granddad lived when he was a little boy?
No.
He lived in London. Who else
Yeah.
lived in London?
Me?
And Alex did
And
too.
Alex did too,
But
yeah.
I was born in London.
And who else was born in London?
Grandad.
That's right.
And me too.
And you too, Alex? You were born in London as well?
No.
No, he wasn't.
No, you were living in London.
Yeah, living in London, but he was
I
born
was
in Prague.
Born in Prague.
Daddy, look at this picture.
Uh-huh. Who's that there? Go ask Dad. Go ask Granddad who that is.
This is Grandad.
No, do you know who that is?
No. Me?
That's your daddy.
Hmm?
When I was a baby.
That's when he was a baby. And that's my daddy. So that was
That?
one of the few pictures.
You look super different.
I was small.
That's one of the few pictures that we actually got with, because he was in hospital at that time, I think.
Mm. Oh no.
Yeah.
You know, or he was in and out of hospital.
Yeah.
You know what? I didn't want to go out of Mommy's tummy.
Yeah.
Because I was wrapping Mommy's tummy. I don't want it to go back inside.
That's silly. That's very silly.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Listen, you can come back in a few minutes, okay? In about 20 minutes. But you can ask Granddad another question about another picture there if you want. Let's see if there's another question about another picture.
Bird poop.
Yeah, I got hit with a cream pie.
What happened there? What was that?
That was a Jackson Dodds
Uh-huh.
of the Cub Camp.
Oh my goodness. So, Granddad used to be a cub leader. You know what cubs are? It's like a group that goes camping. Like, you know when you went to your camp? Yeah. It was like that. He does that,
Yeah.
like that. Okay.
And look. Who's this?
Okay, what's that one you've got?
Is this you?
That's me. And that was on my 70th birthday. That was a party that your daddy arranged for me. He got a whole surprise party, got a whole bunch of my friends and my relatives, my in-laws came down. Yeah, there was all sorts of people there. And I was 70.
What present did you get?
Oh, I can't remember the presents I got. There was a lot of special ones.
I don't know.
That was a long time ago. Yes, I know. Didn't I get messy? Took me a long time to get cleaned up too.
Yeah. Snowing.
No, it's not. It wasn't snowing. It's just some specks on the picture. The picture got splattered with something. You know who that is?
Me?
No, it's not you. It's your Auntie Karen.
But he looks.
Yeah, I know. It's Auntie Karen.
Yeah, it's, she was a
Daddy,
baby.
when she was a baby. We just brought her home and took her out to the cottage.
Wow. I see, Alex. Okay, guys. Yeah, last one. Okay. Which one's that? Oh, that's a photo, yeah. Okay, go show that to Granddad. Ask where that is.
Oh, that's where I used to go camping. That's High Falls Park. Yeah.
And look, Daddy can't see me.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, put these back, guys, and
Can I?
because Daddy wants to do this.
Okay, come
Because
on,
we
guys.
got to get going.
We gotta go soon.
We've got to go soon. Yeah, that's me. That's when I was a soldier.
And this is your dog?
That was my doggy that I had at that
This
time.
is
That was
you?
Ricky. Yeah, that's
Daddy,
me.
this is Ricky. And this is
Yeah,
not
Ricky's a
you?
dog.
No, that's not me. Just that one.
Rick is
Okay, let Daddy do this because we have to go out, you know. You've got to go to tennis.
Okay, guys. Guys, I'm gonna just talk to Granddad more about this stuff, and you can talk to him later.
Okay, we can go over these later, fellas.
Okay.
Put it back.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, I'll see you later.
Come on, guys. Come on, Cook. Let's go, monkey.
No.
Okay, go. Yeah, go to us soon. Go and close the door, please. That's true.
It's going to fall apart when I leave.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking is just, I was going to ask you some, simple questions and stuff. But I was
Yeah,
gonna
sure.
Maybe just start with some of these old pictures.
Yeah.
And here's a picture of you with a couple of dogs. And,
Yeah.
Hannah, what's
Yeah.
that picture about?
That was my aunt's farm, my Aunt Dolly, which was my dad's sister. And they lived on a farm. They didn't own the farm. They lived on the farm. And they took care of dogs. Dolly's husband, I can't even remember his name because he died about 1936 or 37 or something. And he was in the army. And in those days, that was peacetime, troops used to go to foreign parts like the West Indies or India or whatever, Singapore. And officers always had dogs. So when they went away, they used to have needed someone to take care of their dogs until they came back. They're usually away for a couple of years. So my uncle made a good living just taking care of these dogs. And he was in barracks in Aldershot, and my Aunt Dolly actually took care of the dogs. But we went there on several vacations. And I seem to remember this one. I didn't like the prickly grass. They had to get a blanket or something for me to sit on because I was sitting on the ground on the grass, and I didn't like the prickly grass on my skin.
So how old were you there?
Oh, probably, well, looking at my hair, I was probably about 2 years old.
Oh, really? And you remember that when you were 2?
That was one of my first, yeah, looking at the picture, I remember that prickly grass.
Huh.
Yeah, and I was crying because I had to sit on this grass.
Like sitting on needles.
Yeah, it wasn't all that prickly, it's just I was a city kid.
Yeah.
I wasn't used to grass.
So where were you living at that time? So you were
We-
born in...
I was born in North Woolwich.
North Woolwich? East Ham or West Ham? Or?
Where that was part of West Ham. It was the dock area. There were old terraced houses, and they were built in the early 1800s for the dock workers who were building the docks in those days. My grandfather was one of them. And we lived in this terrace house, I guess, until I was about 2. Then we moved from there to a new council estate in Dagenham, the Beacon Tree Estate. And it was much posher, and there were still some row houses, but they were semi-detached, and we lived in a semi-detached house, which was considered pretty upper class to us in those days. And it was quite a big house. And my dad's parents came to live with us, my grandmother and grandfather. My grandmother, unfortunately, died prior to World War II. I don't know, it probably would have been about 1938, somewhere around about there. I remember I loved her dearly. She used to spoil me. She was bedridden. I don't know what she was ailing from. But I used to creep up into her room, and someone used to bring her grapes, and I used to love grapes. Grapes were a delicacy to us because they were expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to creep into her room, and I'd say, Grandma, can I? It's like this, and she used to say in a loud voice, "Oh, would you like a grape, dear?" And my mother would hear this and yell up the stairs, "Get out of Grandma's room and stop stealing her grapes."
So this was Nana's mother, or
No, this was my father's mother.
Okay, what was her name?
I can't remember. I don't think I ever called her anything other than Grandma. And I never knew her name. My grandfather I knew as Samuel, Samuel David.
And
But-
was he the one working on the docks?
No, he wasn't working on the docks. That was my mother's father who was working
And what
on.
was his name?
His name was Jim.
Jim Down.
Jim Downs, yeah. And he did all sorts of construction work. He was what was called a timberman. They didn't have steel scaffolding in those days. All the scaffolding and all that was made of wood. And it had to be shaped. And he used to swing this double-bitted axe all day long, shaping these, 6x8 timbers to fit to make a scaffold and that sort of thing. And that's what he did. And he went all over the country. He was the Bristol Tunnel, the Cardiff docks, the Woolwich docks. He was up working in Liverpool at the Mersey docks. Anywhere where there was a big construction site, he was there.
Making scaffolding.
Making the scaffolding, and he'd take off. My mother they had a total of 8 kids. Actually, they had 10. 2 of them passed away. The last 2, the twins. And my mother was the second eldest, the eldest girl of the family. And my Uncle Jim was the eldest boy. But there were 3 girls and 5 boys in the family.
Wow.
Quite a large family. And my grandmother would just pack everybody up and get some sort of wagon, hire a wagon to take all their furniture to the new house or the new flat or whatever it was that my grandfather had gotten. He'd gone there, got the job, found a place to live, then sent for
Wow.
my grandmother, and she would pack everything up and go with all the kids.
So nomadic. So how long would these jobs last for? A few years, or?
It depended on the job. Most of them lasted for 3 or 4 years. And then his part of it, would be done. There was still other things to do, perhaps on the job, but his part of it, building the scaffolding, would be done, and he'd be looking for something else. But he was well known in the trade as a good worker, and he never had a problem getting a job. He was never out of work for very long. But he was a very strong man. I don't remember him like that. I think he had cancer. And he passed away before World War II also. But I remember him when I was 4 or 5 years old, I guess. And he was a countryman at heart, but he always ended up living in cities because of the work he did. And but they traveled around the country, and my mother, at one time they lived in Southampton. And he was working on extensions to the Southampton docks. And my mother was 12 years old, and that was when the Titanic sailed from Southampton. And they were given a half day off school to see this enormous ship. It was supposed to be the be-all and end-all of ocean liners. They all went down to the docks to watch it sail. So she was on the docks on April the 12th, I think it sailed. And of course, April the 14th, it hit the iceberg.
Wow. So Nana saw the Titanic.
Yes, she did.
Wow. In Southampton.
Yeah. Well, she was born in 1900. My dad was born in 1901. And I used to think sometimes of the changes that they had seen in their lifetime, like the advent of the automobile and motor buses and that sort of thing, and radio. Television, even natural things like that. We take so many things we take for granted, telephones and stuff, electric ovens and microwaves, and I've seen those same things too. I grew up in the 1930s, and the changes that have taken place, jetliners. When I went to Canada, basically the only way to get to Canada was by ship. From the British Isles to North America was by ship, because there were some planes that flew, but they were usually service aircraft, and they stopped at Shannon in Ireland and Iceland, Labrador, you know, and all these stopovers because of the fuel.
Yeah.
And
Planes couldn't make it across.
they couldn't make a non-stop flight.
Yeah.
That was the pioneers.
I'm just gonna check the. I think I gotta change some batteries, Dad. So just
Okay.
That's fine, Dad. All right. So, I mean, we're just kind of jumping around, but so, tell me about sort of your childhood when you sort of were going around, living in London and different places. What was sort of your fondest memory, would you say, of the time before the war? Sort of before.
Yeah, I think that time was the best time. I was always conscious of the very big family on my mother's side. I had lots of cousins. Some of them were older than me, because there was like, when you get 8 children in a family, there's generation spreads.
Yeah.
You know, my Uncle Alf, who was the youngest of my uncles, was actually only about 6 years older than my sister.
Yeah.
You know, so there was several generations in the same family. There was the elder ones, Reg, my cousin Jim, Ronnie, and my sister. They were all the same age. They were in their teens when I was, you know, about 5 and 6. And there was my cousin Gordon, my cousin Jean, and a couple of others that were the same age as me. And then there was another group that was some 5 years or so younger.
Oh, really? Younger
Yeah,
than you?
yeah. So
Because Nana was the oldest.
that's right. Yeah, it's like Jimmy Downs.
Yeah.
I remember him as a baby.
Yeah.
You know, when I was about 6, I think he was with us as a baby. And so it was a sort of mixed up family, but we always used to have family gatherings, first of all at my grandmother's house, and then she got into her 60s and she couldn't handle it anymore. And my mother, being the eldest daughter, she took over for the family reunions, Christmas, the big holidays, perhaps Easter or something. We didn't have Thanksgiving in Britain. But, and it's funny because that tradition continued over in Canada when Kath became the hostess. After my mother, you know, got into her 70s and 80s, it was Kath that took over, that used to hold the family and friends gatherings, you know. So that was something that I was always conscious of. And I used to love those because they were big parties, and used to last most of the night. They always used to come to our house on Woodward Road in Beacon Tree and sleep over. The women with babies got beds. Women without babies got couches and armchairs. The kids were all packed into one room with a bunch of mattresses and pillows. And the guys stayed up all night playing cards, okay, from about 2 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning, playing cards. And that was when I was growing up. That was one of my fondest wishes, to be old enough to stay up and play cards with the big guys, you know.
Yeah.
And but by the time I grew old enough to do that, it was kind of, the family is sort of broken up and people moved out of the area. My uncles on my mother's side moved to the north of England after the war, and the families sort of separated and we didn't get to see them so much. But it was fun. It was fun growing up with that sort of family, because when we had parties, there wasn't a lot of drinking. I mean, there was beer in quart bottles, but no one had more than about 2-3 glasses of beer. That was it. And some of the ladies had port wine. That was considered a ladies' drink. And but we played games. There was all sorts of parlor games. There was charades. There was other weird games, and that if you were caught out at a game, you had to pay a forfeit. And you all gathered at the end, and all the people that had been caught out at something, and everyone got caught at something, you had to pay a forfeit, and there was various things you had to go through. And my uncles were very much extroverts. They had a whole slew of these things that they used to put you through, you know, like most of them you'd be blindfolded to start with, you know. And they'd say, okay, we're going to lift you up, you know, and they put you on, you had to stand on a board and two guys would lift you up. And you would put your hands on their shoulders and you'd feel them going down and they'd say, okay, now jump. We can't hold you anymore, jump. And you think you're, you know, got to jump about 4 feet or something like that. Actually, they were going down rather than you going up, you know. So when you jumped, it was a shock to find you're only 3 inches off the ground, you know. All these sort of silly things. And they got to be, we were doing the same things all the time, but somehow they all seemed to be fresh and new, and everyone laughed, and it was such a lot of fun. But that was the fun time, I think. World War II made a change. They weren't the family gatherings. You couldn't get together as much. People were off. I was evacuated for a while, which wasn't a very pleasant experience. And then I got sick and had to be taken out of London because I had discovered I had tuberculosis, and I wasn't allowed to go into air raid shelters and that sort of thing because A, it wasn't good for me and it wasn't good for the other people in the air raid shelter either. So I was taken up to Blackpool in the northwest coast, right by the seaside. And it's a vacation town. We lived there for about a year before coming back to London after the air raids kind of the Blitz stopped. There were still air raids at night a lot of the time, but we moved around a lot through to damage to the houses, and you know, sometimes you get blast would crack all the windows, break the windows or something, and you couldn't get them fixed. There was no way to get them fixed, so they just board them up, and you'd move someplace else because there was no materials. You know, everything was involved in the war effort. So you just find another place to live, and places were getting increasingly in short supply because of the bombing and the amount of buildings that had been destroyed. And eventually we went through several apartments and rooms, stayed with relatives for a couple of weeks and then moved on somewhere else. And we finally found a house in Elm Park, which was in Essex, to the east of London, outside the boundaries of London, but still considered part of the Greater London area, really. It wasn't that far out. But came under the county of Essex. And it was an area that was very close to a fighter base, Hornchurch Aerodrome, which was one of the Battle of Britain bases. And at that time, because the airports, the Air Force bases were being raided on a daily and nightly basis, there was a big housing estate around it, a big subdivision, and it was evacuated completely. They cleared everybody out because of the danger. And they reopened it in 1942, I think it was. Yeah, I would have been 10. And the elderly couple that owned the house didn't want to move back there. So they put it up for rent, and we managed to grab it, and we suddenly had a house.
I don't know, sweetie. Can you go? You can come back later, sweetie. Go and close the door.
But I thought Alex is here.
He's not hiding here, don't worry.
No, he's not hiding in here. So that was great for about 3-4 years. We were actually settled in one place. I went to a regular school, and I went to...
And is that the place that we visited?
That was the place we visited when we went over there, Elm Park. Yeah, we went on the metro, on the subway to Elm Park.
And the other place, you mentioned an address before where these parties were held.
That was in Beaconstree, in Dagenham, where the big Ford Works is, yeah.
What road was that?
That was Woodward Road.
And that's the first place that you lived at?
That's the first place that I remember. Before that, we lived in North Woolwich on Albert Road, which was basically destroyed in World War II when they were bombing the docks because it was very close, about one street over from the actual King George V dock. And the whole street was basically wiped, the whole area was basically wiped out because they were row houses and they went down like dominoes, you know. They were flimsily built and they just went down like dominoes.
So the Elm Park was kind of the more stable.
It was,
place.
and we stayed there till we were there in 1942, I guess. I was 10. I went to 1 year of elementary school there, to that Alof school I think we showed you. And it was supposed to be a temporary school at that time, and it's still going, I think. And then from there I went to high school. And the high school was overlooking the aerodrome. We used to see the Spitfires and Hurricanes taking off. And then the Americans moved in and they had tempests and typhoons and that sort of thing. And we used to watch them taking off and landing.
Wow, that was exciting.
It was. That was what I mostly remember about the war. It wasn't scary as a kid because I think all kids like to go, yeah, this sort of stuff, you know. And to watch dogfights in the air, you know, was kind of thrilling. The scary part was the rockets when they started to come over. The Doodlebugs, first of all, which was the first jet engine propelled thing to come over.
Well, go
Okay.
by yourself. Okay.
Okay.
Just a second, P.
Okay.
I think you were talking about what's your secondary school and you're the
Suttons, yeah.
in Hornchurch.
In Hornchurch, yeah.
What was it called? The school?
Sutton's.
Sutton.
Sutton's Secondary School, yeah.
Oh, is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there as far as I know, yeah.
Huh.
But in those days, the school leaving age was 14.
Really, you graduated?
So I graduated at 14. Actually, I graduated on my 14th birthday.
Wow.
I left school and I started work the following Monday.
Wow. At 14.
Yeah, that was a full-time job, 5.5 days a week.
Oh, goodness.
But I was saying about the rockets were the scary part of World War II, I think. Especially the Doodlebugs weren't that bad because you could see them. And they sounded something like a two-stroke motorbike or an old lawnmower going put, 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 put. And they weren't dangerous until the motor quit. They ran out of fuel. And then they could either glide or they could come straight down. So you just sort of watch them sort of keep going, you know. And then it would disappear and then bang, there'd be an explosion. But the V-2 rockets were really scary because there was absolutely no rocket. They were an ICBM type thing. They just went up and came down. And they were packed with explosive and they could take out a 5-block area with no problem, you know. And there was just an explosion, big bang, a big hole in the ground. That was it. You had no warning, nothing. And I think that the buzz was that Hitler expected to win the war with those. And it's possible that it could have happened had not the Allies advanced from Normandy so rapidly and they overran the launching sites and put a stop to it. But it was, for a while, they were coming down, they were raining down on London and the south of England. And there was starting to be mass panic, you know, because you never knew when these things were going to explode, day or night. There was no way of telling when they were coming.
Well, there'd be no sound.
No sound, just a big bang.
Wow.
A big black cloud and flames, that's it.
Wow. And that's the one of those V-2s took out that chapel next to
The guards,
the guards
yes,
chapel,
it was, yeah. And killed half the titled heads of Britain in there because they're all associated with the guards in some form or another.
Wow.
And yeah, there was about 300 people killed in that church at that time.
Back to the start of the war, when did you first become aware that there was a war?
Well, there was lots of talk. Like I was 7, So I was conscious of the grown-ups talking about war, you know. I didn't know what it meant. But then one day I was sent off to school. And I guess this had all been arranged, but this was like 3 days before the actual war. This was like September the 1st, I guess. There'd been letters sent home from school, I guess. And my parents agreed that I should be evacuated because the government decided there was, you know, they very much feared there was going to be wholesale bombing of civilian targets right off the bat, the moment war was declared, as there was in Poland. And so they said, we better get the kids out. So they made this hurried decision to evacuate kids. And it was sort of partially planned, but not all the way. And we went to school that morning and were loaded on, I had my gas mask, but by that time we were all carrying gas masks in a little cardboard box. And I had a paper carrier bag with my change of clothes or something and a package of sandwiches, and that was it. And a backpack, I think. And went to school, got loaded on the buses, taken up into the centre of London to the railway terminus and put on a train and chuffed off into the sunset and say, where are we going? What is this? You know, it was like an adventure, but our teachers were with us. It was half the school went. You know, several hundred kids.
Did you know what was coming?
No.
They just sprung it on us.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. You know, so said goodbye to my mum and dad, and that was it. And it was pretty traumatic because the journey dragged on, and being kids, you know, like I say, by this time I'm 7.5. The first thing we did was eat our sandwiches, you know, at 9:30 in the morning. And there was nothing to eat for the rest of the day. We were on this train about 6 to 7 hours.
Yeah.
And we finally got into some place in Somerset, I found afterwards. And after changing trains a couple of times and being marshaled into another carriage and this sort of thing. And we got there and we were taken to the little village, and there was the village hall, community centre, I guess. And there were some ladies there who gave us tea and some cake, which most of us hadn't eaten all day. And people came and chose kids. There was no sort of roster of volunteers to take kids and set up. They did that afterwards. But at the first time, they were just sort of saying, they sent out notices around the village saying, please come and take an evacuee, you know. And so some people came. So it was a farming community. So the brawny, it was all elementary school kids up to the age of 10. So the brawny 10-year-olds, boys, went first because they could help on the farm.
Yeah.
Then the little girls that looked like Shirley Temple with the golden ringlets, you know, they were pretty, so they went next. And the scruffy bunch were last. And I remember being left there there was 3 of us left. There was a sister who was about 9, another little boy who was a few months younger than me. And we were sitting there and we could hear these women talking about, well, I can't take them. Oh, I don't know what we're going to do. You know, I can't leave them here, you know. And I just imagined that they were just going to walk out and leave us in this place and we were going to get abandoned. And it was a distressing feeling, and that stayed with me a long time. I really felt upset, you know, that there I was. I didn't even know where I was. We didn't even know the name of the town or anything like that. Just a long train ride away from my parents, just abandoned. So I'm wondering where I was going to sleep that night. And I guess there was some sort of trauma attached to that. But eventually this elderly couple came and they wanted 2 kids and they were prevailed upon to take the 3 of us. So we did, and we stayed with them for a while. I think it was about 8 weeks. And they didn't really have room for us. For a while the 3 of us were sleeping together, but they couldn't stand the sound of us crying all night. Or the little boy was crying most, and then I'd have a little whimper, and then the girl would start crying. And so eventually the little girl went to sleep with the old lady, and the 2 boys had to sleep with the old man. It was figured out later that's possibly where I picked up the tuberculosis.
Oh, really?
Because this guy had a real chesty cough and all that sort of thing, so he may have been a carrier. But anyway, we were there for about 8 weeks, and there was nothing happening in London. They hadn't started the bombing or anything.
So you were back though for the Blitz, so when it
So I was back for the start of the beginning of the Blitz.
and so that was when in
That was August 1940. And they started the bombing. First they went after the aerodromes and tried to put the Air Force out of commission, but they didn't manage it. And
so where were you in the first?
so we were living in our house on Woodward Road. And I remember the first time I actually heard a siren go off, I panicked. I freaked out. I was screaming and yelling. My mother picked me up and held me because this elderly couple had been filling us full of these stories about, oh, you're better off here because, you know, they're being bombed, there's bombing and killing and everything in London, because they were getting paid subsistence allowance and they wanted to keep us there. They didn't want us to go home, you know. So they were telling us all these horror stories about all the bombing in London. There wasn't any bombing in London.
Really? Whoa.
So anyway, the first time I heard a siren, like I say, I just freaked. I thought there was going to be bombs raining down and gas attacks and everything else. And there was nothing happening. Just the siren went off and the plane flew over and that was it, you know. But after that, it didn't bother me at all. It just became a fact of life. We didn't have a shelter at that house. We just used to hide under the dining room table, which was a solid oak table. And you did that in case the ceilings came down. That was all. But as time went on, by the end of September, I was starting to get sick. And I ended up with pneumonia and pleurisy, and they took me into hospital because I was developing fluid on my lungs. And through x-rays, they discovered that I had a TB spot. My dad, in the meantime, had gone up to work at Blackpool. They were building a new aerodrome there, or extending the existing aerodrome. And he was in construction, and he was working on that. So that was by the seaside, and they said that was the best place I could go because there'd be the fresh ocean air. Actually, it was the Irish Sea, but anyway. So we went up there, and we were there about 3 weeks, and he got moved back to London again. So we stayed at, my mum and my grandfather came up because he was living with us. My grandmother had died, and my grandfather was still, my dad's dad, was still living with us. So he came up and stayed with us, and he used to have to take me out. His job was to take me out. I think of this when I take Alex out. And we'd go to the seafront and sit there because I was supposed to get at least 2 or 3 hours of fresh air every day, the sea breeze. I said this was in order to, it was part of my cure. And poor old Granddad, poor old Sam, he had to take me out every day. And by now it's November, you know, in December, and it's cold. There's a wind coming off the Irish Sea, you know, and he's sitting there in a muffler and overcoat. And I'm sitting there in an overcoat and a blanket, you know, and we're sitting there shivering, but we've got to get 3 hours in the open air, you know. And he didn't like that at all. So, and I had a special ration card that gave me a special diet. And I had extra milk and extra eggs, which were on ration, and that sort of thing, extra dairy products for the calcium. And after about a year, they decided I was cured, that it had cleared up of the TB, so I was able to go back to London. I didn't go to school for about 5 months. I didn't go to school that winter, and I started school in the spring. And I went to school until, I think, September, or till the summer holiday, and after the summer holiday, in September, we went back to London. So I started at a different school. We had a different apartment, different school again.
Yeah, it's a lot of moving around.
A lot of moving around, a lot of different schools. And that was hard because I didn't know anybody, you know, and it was, at that age, I'm now 8, 9 years old, and you want to be part of the gang sort of thing.
You don't really have any friends. You start
Yeah,
again from
so you had to start again from scratch. A couple of times we moved, and it was in the middle of the semester. And I'd be picking up, having to catch up or something, you know, stuff I'd lost or whatever. Or they'd be in a different curriculum.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was sort of hard, but that was the worst part. I mean, there was a lot of kids that had it a hell of a lot worse than I did. We didn't have any direct hits. We didn't get blown up, or, you know, no one in the family was actually killed or anything. So it was, compared to others, you know, I can remember when we moved to Elm Park, there were two of us on the street. My best buddy, Eric Franklin, who lived diagonally across the street, and I were the only two kids on that street that had their fathers at home. All the rest were in the services. And Eric's dad was a long-distance truck driver, so he was home periodically, you know, like he'd be overnighting in different places. And my dad was in construction and would be sent elsewhere and all that sort of thing, so I'd see him every couple of months or whatever. But at least they weren't in the forces. But everyone else, all the other dads were in the forces, and that's the way it was by 1943, 1944.
And do you remember the end of the war?
Oh yes, very much so. VE Day, we didn't go anywhere. We had a street party, and everyone brought out their rations. I remember D-Day vividly too, because several weeks before D-Day, long convoys of trucks. Like, first of all, we woke up one morning and came out, and there's like parking spaces, numbered parking spaces, all painted on the streets, something with a number. And then one morning we came out, and it's full of army trucks. And they were on their way down to the Tilbury docks to be loaded on the landing craft and stuff, and to go overseas.
Really, on your street even?
Yeah, they were all parked there because they had nowhere else to buy. They were brought down from vehicle parks all around England, and they had to park them somewhere overnight to take them down to the docks the next morning, refuel and everything. And they sent trucks over from the airport, the Air Force Base, Hornchurch, with fuel, cans of fuel to gas everybody up, and they take the crews back to eat at the Air Force Base. And they were coming through afterwards on a regular basis, but I remember the D-Day being announced on the radio, on the BBC radio, and going out and watching planes towing gliders passing overhead. Because being in Essex, it was almost in, you know, from all the bases in East Anglia, Norfolk, Suffolk, all the bases, that was the direct over the edge of the North Sea.
So you could actually see the D-Day invasion forces?
Yeah,
the gliders
the gliders are going, yeah. Although some had already landed, but it kept going for about 2 days. I mean, they were still sending them over. And
really well.
they were making new bridgeheads and so on. And so I remember D-Day very vividly. And then for the end of the war, for D-Day, for VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, we had a street party, and everyone sort of got out all their hoarded rations, because there were so many things that were rationed by that time. We were short of everything, you know. And somehow the people just found enough tea, enough sugar to make tea, and and we set up trestle tables in the street and had this street party, and everyone was whooping it up and dancing and music and everything. And then the following day, my mum and dad took me up into London, went to Buckingham Palace, and saw the King and the Queen and the princesses and Winston Churchill come out on the balcony of Buckingham Palace.
So you were there in that crowd?
In that crowd, yeah.
You could see them from where?
Well, we got close enough to be able to see them, yeah. Yeah, so it was a historic occasion. In the meantime, my sister joined the Air Force when was it, 1940, I think. Auntie Kath. She joined the Air Force. She was 20. And she was eventually stationed after going through basic training, and they tried to train her as a flight mechanic, but she just wasn't mechanically inclined. And they found out that she was a hairdresser. She'd been an apprentice to a hairdresser, and she was within a year of getting her papers as a qualified hairdresser when she quit and joined the Air Force. My mother was quite mad, because it cost my mother a lot of money to put her through an apprenticeship. But anyway, she could do styling and cutting and that sort of thing. And so they found that out, and because in the Women's Air Force, they needed hairdressers. So she got sent to a base in outside of Ramsey on the Isle of Man, which is in the Irish Sea, about 90 miles from Liverpool, I guess. Anyway, the Isle of Man was self-contained. They sort of had enough for themselves and a little bit for export, but there was nothing being exported because there were U-boats in the Irish Sea, and what they could export wasn't worth enough to bring it to England. So they had actually surplus of dairy products, of eggs, bacon, meat they had over there. So what was it, 1944, I think, my mother took me over there on holiday, and we went into a restaurant, and we asked them, what's for dinner or something. They said, we only have steak or eggs. We just about went crazy because, we hadn't seen a steak in about 3 years, and eggs were, well, you saw eggs in the spring, that was it. Although in Elm Park, we started to keep our own chickens for the eggs, But, and then, well, put some butter on your toast. And it was real butter, it wasn't margarine. We were down to a ration of 2 ounces of butter per person per week. That was the butter ration in England. And so we stuffed ourselves. So after VE Day, my sister was, because she married my brother-in-law, Jim, in the forces, and because she was married, that was extra points towards her demobilization. So she was released. But my brother-in-law was still in the Air Force. So she stayed over there. He got an apartment and stayed there until he was demobbed. And so we went over in 1945. We went over there on vacation again. And we were actually in a train from Euston Station going up to Fleetwood, I guess it was, where we used to take the ferry across to the Isle of Man, when we got the news of the atom bomb dropping, first of all, and then the VJ Day. VJ Day happened the day after we arrived on the Isle of Man. And everyone got so drunk, not me, I was 13. But, no, I guess I was 13, 1945. And, but I don't know whether you've heard of Manx cats. They're a breed of cat bred on the Isle of Man that have no tails. They're tailless. So all these Air Force guys, they hit the town from the base where Kath and Jim were stationed, had been stationed. And they went into town, and they all got pissy-eyed drunk. And they thought it'd be fun if everyone had Manx ties. So they cut their tie off just below the knot. They thought this was the funniest thing in the world. Next morning, they were on parade. No one has a tie to wear. They're all scrambling around trying to find another tie. It was funny. So that was the end of the war, as far as I was concerned. And
Yeah, we gotta go.
Okay.
They need lunch. What time is it, Yana?
It's about 5 to 1.
Oh, we gotta go.
Yep.
Well, I don't think it's gonna be lunch. We sandwich.
Yeah.
You mentioned here.
Yeah, there's one.
Place on Elm Park, you said?
That's where we lived in Elm Park. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, there was
And that was a school picture, I think, and from my early school years.
Okay. Well, I think those are the oldest ones, right? We looked at the dog.
Yeah,
I haven't
with
seen
my
it.
mom and dad. Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Oh, I was
Yeah.
gonna scan these, but I never scanned them. So that's that color one. Is it colorized? Or is it like
That's what it came out like. This was a school picture, and whether they were colorized after the fact or not, but that's how we got it.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Color pictures.
I don't know when that was, but I would have been. I was wearing a tie. I probably would have been 9, 10 maybe at that age. I don't really know. I know this one with my mother and my sister. She was on leave and joined us in Blackpool. We were up there again. That was in 1944, I guess, because they closed the schools again because of the V1 and V2 rockets. So they just closed our school down. And we went back up to live in Blackpool for about 2 months, I think. It's just for basically the summer vacation. And Kath came over on leave from the Isle of Man. I went to this photo studio and took this photo. So I would have been, 9, I guess. Yeah, then 9, maybe 10. Yeah. Why my mother looked young. They were 20 years. She was 20 years old when she had Kath. So in 1940, Kath was 20. My mother was 40. She was born in 1900. And Kath was born in 1920. So
1920.
yeah. So.
And you were born then 12 years later.
Yeah, 1932. And it's funny
a big
when.
difference between you and Annie Kath.
Yeah, I didn't even realize I had a sister when I was like 4 and 5 years old, because she didn't live with us. She lived with my grandmother. And, it was just one of those things where she used to show up every so often, and I liked having her there and that sort of thing. But it wasn't until I got, I guess during the war, and I was about 8 or 9, that I realized that I actually had a sister. Sort of weird, but I got very fond of Kath towards the end. After we came to Canada, we both came to Canada. I came over first, and my parents decided to come over, and then Kath and Jim followed with the 2 girls, and I got quite fond of her. She was really something. She was a going concern. She really was.
Annie Kath was always a big kind of one of the pillars.
Yeah.
When we go down to Toronto, Mississauga, she was always there.
And my brother-in-law Jim fitted in very well with my uncles, because he was very much an extrovert too. So he fitted right in with the family, and with my mother's side of the family. Didn't see too much of my father's side of the family, my Aunt Kitty, my Aunt Dolly. I know my Aunt Kitty's husband was a sergeant in the Metropolitan Police. And apart from that, I don't know too much about them. They lived in South Woolwich, and Aunt Dolly lived down towards Rochester Way in Kent, on the farm down there. But we didn't visit, maybe once a year perhaps, to get together, but but it wasn't in and out like everybody else was, there all the time for everything.
You were saying earlier that you finished school at age 14 and you went
Yes.
to work right away. So tell me about those working years in the UK before you went to Canada.
Well, it was a very large company. It was a cooperative company. It was the Cooperative Wholesale Society. Now, the co-op movement is very strong in Britain. It started in Britain, and basically it's people join, they become members, and they pay a joining fee, and they put all this money together, and they use the buying power of a lot of people to get cheap goods. And that's how it started in the late 1800s. But as time went on, these various cooperatives spread over Britain and Scotland, Wales. And they started their own factories and everything was, ordinary people became shareholders. You became a shareholder in this enterprise. So I worked for the Cooperative Wholesale Society, which was the suppliers to all the retail stores. And that was their second largest place. Their headquarters were in Manchester. But I started work in London, in Aldgate, and it was they had their own post office, postal department, where all the mail came in, was sorted and distributed to the departments, and all the mail was picked up and mailed out from the postal department. And they had about 20 kids. It was always, there was about 3 sort of adults in their 20s or 30s working there, but all the rest were kids up to the age of 18. And it was the stepping stone. From there you may have gone to other departments. And they had like a big hardware department, furnishings, clothing, all sorts of different departments in the buildings around there. They had about 2,500 people working at the London branch.
Wow, pretty big.
So that's where I started, and I was there about 6 months, and I moved to the dispatch office in the hardware department and on the loading bay, making out bills of lading and that sort of stuff. Very much a junior clerk. And it was an old-fashioned Britain in 1946. There was still, the unions had become fairly strong during the wartime years, but everyone was rooted back in the 30s. And they were afraid of the dirty 30s and the unemployment and the fact that there was 5 people for every job, you know. And there was this feeling that it was just seemed to be run by old people, you know. It was the whole world. And I remember there were guys coming back from the forces. They'd been in the war for 6 years. And there was one guy that worked in our office. And at that particular company, you were not considered grown up.
I want to show you something. Look. I got that. I put my feet on it. Look.
Oh my goodness.
Crash.
You gotta be careful.
Yes.
Okay, Cook. I'm talking to Granddad here. I'm interviewing him, so. Okay, go.
Bye now.
Yeah. Okay, no more Lego roller skates, sweetie.
I thought they just was one leg.
Yeah.
Okay, Cook. Let's go. Mommy said there's a shower.
No, Alex is going.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like actually, I guess we did talk for almost an hour last time because this tape's running out here.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave that anecdote for another time.
Well, no, you were saying the guys would return from the service. And
Yeah, and you were not considered an adult at the company until you were 26. There was one guy that I was working with, Teddy Selleck, volunteered in 1939, and he joined the Tank Corps and became a troop sergeant. And he was with the 8th Army in the Western Desert. In Montgomery's troops, or Alexander and Montgomery. And he was 25 when he was demobbed after 6 years. He was 18 when he joined. He was 6.5 years or something in the army. And he came back and he was called Boy. Unbelievable. But anyway, like I say, it was. I guess it's modernized now, but at that time it was pretty antiquated. They were still going by the rules of the 20s and 30s.
You can ask a question, Christina, but quick, because we only have a minute left.
Dad,
Yes.
was this your car?
No, that was just a place I used to live. That was in a place called Gants Hill. And Daddy and I went to visit it.
Yeah, we went on our Granddad's first trip back to London.
Yeah.
I already went on a sleepover in London. I went in London with Daddy. We went in our old school, and then we went to Anouk's house to sleep.
That's right, we went back to Crouch End to the neighborhood.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Nice, yeah. Well, Dad, it seems like I have to change tapes here, because...
Okay.
So maybe I'll do that.
Can I see the video?
You can see it another time, but right now I'm still trying to record the video, but we're
Yeah.
getting straight to you.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when I was like 14 through to when I was 18.
Yeah, you were at the co-op.
Yeah. And I was there for 4 years.
It's still there now, isn't it?
Oh yes, it's still a big
Yeah, yeah.
big concern. Yeah, it's still there, and stores all over the country. You know, like each different group. There's different. There's the Grays Cooperative Society. There's the London Cooperative Society, and there's one in Leeds and Bristol and so on. But they're individual retailers.
Yeah.
But they all get, you know, they're all based on the same idea of local shareholders who get a book or some sort of passbook or something, and it stamps all your purchases, and you get a percentage back, you know. And anyway,
So you did that. So you were at co-op for a while, and
then I went into the army.
uh-huh.
I was conscripted for part of my national service, and it was 18 months when I first went in, but I was in about 2 months, and they changed the conscription to 2 years. So after doing 2 months service, I had more to do than when I started. You know?
Wow.
But it was
So what year was that when you were?
that was 1950. Okay, August of 1950 when I went into the service. You're supposed to go in when you're 18. I was a little bit late because I still had scar tissue on my lungs from the tuberculosis. So I had to go back for further x-rays and that sort of thing, because they had to make sure that I was physically fit, because I didn't want to be hit with a pension claim after I'd been in 2 years, you know. But the basic training was good, took place in Aldershot, and I sort of enjoyed that once I found my feet and got over the initial bullshit. The old barracks that we stayed in was rather terrible. I think they were old cavalry barracks that had been built somewhere in the middle of the 18th century. Well, the 18th century, or the 1800s. Yeah, the 1800s, and been condemned about 3 times since 1900, but they were still using them, you know. Don't waste anything. And so all the buildings are very old and crumbly. But once I got my first 2 or 3 weeks out of the way and got used to the routine and everything, it wasn't that bad. The hardest thing to get used to was the food, because Britain was still heavily rationed at that time, even in 1950. And, you know, what rations there were by the time the army cooks had made a mess of it, some of it was pretty unedible, but I survived. You know, we all did. Burned a lot of calories, I suppose. I lost weight. I was weighing about 140 pounds, I think, at the time. I wasn't a very big kid. But then I got posted after my 3 months basic training, and I got sent to a base in near Hindhead in Surrey, near the Devil's Bowl, I think it's called, and which is a natural landmark. And it was the depot and training centre for the Queen Alexandra Royal Army Nursing Corps, which were all women. And I was part of the staff there. I worked in the QM stores. But all the trainees that were there were all women, which was kind of great, being 18 and a half years old and being sent to a place like that with about 350 women and about 70 guys. So, and discipline was extremely lax. It was run by the Medical Corps, Royal Army Medical Corps. So they didn't have much idea of drill or anything like that, you know. And I think the first morning I got up in the morning, I made my bed and rolled up my blankets and put all my kit out, and turned around. Everyone in the barrack room is staring at me, sort of saying, "What the hell are you doing?" You know. But this is the way it was in training, right? I soon learned to take it easy. But it was towards the end, it became I realized it was basically a waste of time. You know, it was a sort of you did this 2 years, And there really wasn't enough work to go around. Why they added another 6 months to our service, I don't know. And there really wasn't enough. I mean, there were things going on in the world. Korea was going on, but we didn't have that many troops, and the Brits didn't have that many troops in Korea. They were part of the Commonwealth Brigade. And they were still troops trying to control the terrorists in Malaya. But apart from that, they were just showing the flag around the world, and really there wasn't a lot for the peacetime army to do. But I suppose it got kids off the street. I don't know what their aim was. But I was glad to get out. I was offered, you know, promotion and stuff if I stayed in and signed on for 5 years. And by that time I said no. I enjoyed the military life, especially when I got a couple of stripes on my arm and got a pay raise. The last 6 months I was comparatively wealthy. But I got out anyway, and I went back to my old job, and they were offering me less money than I was getting in the army, so I told them to stuff it. And I went to work with my dad in construction, driving a backhoe. And that was sort of interesting for a while. Scary at times, because I didn't really know what I was doing. And he got sick at one point, quite ill. And he was off, and I was left to run this thing on my own, and digging trenches for pipelines, water mains. And it was very narrow, constricted places to do this. And you're swinging this jib around, you know. Anyway, did that for a while, and then Dad got better, and then that job finished, and we went up north to the Midlands, and we stayed with, who did we stay with? My Uncle Joe, I guess, and Aunt Zena. Stayed at their place. Met some of my cousins again, because all my uncles had sort of moved to that area. There was a lot of open cast coal mining going on. And they were driving these enormous great dragline diggers and making lots of money too. So we stayed with them, and then the winter came on, and it got pretty crappy working conditions, because you're outside and it was raining and cold and all that sort of thing. Anyway, turned out my dad had a big argument with the gang boss there, and he quit. So I said, well, if you're going to quit, I'll quit too. He says, we don't have to. I said, well, no, I'm out of here. So I went back to Toronto.
Toronto or?
Yeah, Toronto. I was living in Toronto at the time.
Okay, so this is after the army.
Oh, yeah, because I forgot. I came to Canada. That's right, yes.
Weren't you working on the buses at one point?
Yes, I was. Yeah, that's right. I've completely forgotten about that. That was later I came back to... Yeah, that was later when I was working with my dad. But...
So you finished...
I finished my military, went to work with my dad in construction, then went back to live with my parents again in Gants Hill, where we went to visit. And then I took a couple of temporary jobs. I worked as a temporary postman over the Christmas season. And by that time I was going out with this girl, Shirley. And her dad worked for the London Transport. And he worked on the metro, on the subway system. But he told me that they were looking for people on the buses, so I went and applied, and I got a job as a bus conductor. And I worked about 1.5 years on the buses, and that was fun. You know, you never knew what, because especially the city side of London, you know.
So what routes were you on?
Oh, from the east, from Barking, in that area, worked out of the Barking garage. I forget the name of it, but anyway. And either going to further east into Dagenham and points east, or up to the city, the Route 23, right up to Holborn Station. and it went right through the city of London, along Fleet Street and High Holborn, and finally Oxford Street, and so on. So I got to know a lot of that area, and the great thing was I had a bus pass as an employee. You had the pass, so I did a lot of traveling around in my own time, and either on the metro, you just waved the pass, and that was it, and you could go anywhere, and I did. The underground, and it was, so that was good. I did a fair amount of traveling. And I continued to go out with Shirley at that time. And she took off. She went to work at a holiday camp, and she met somebody else there. And so I was on my own for the summer. But then she came back, and a married boyfriend had to go back to his family. So we joined up. But in the meantime, friends of ours, Beryl and Jerry Toff, Jerry Mason, Beryl Toff, had emigrated to Canada. And we were getting letters from them in Toronto. And I decided that was probably the place to be, because this was by 1953, 54, even after the coronation, which was a great bright spot. But things were still pretty grim, There was, things were in short supply. Wages were nothing to write about. Things were still on ration. We were worse off for some things. We were worse off after the war than we were during the war. Bread didn't go on ration until 1946. And you allowed X number of loaves a week per family, and this sort of thing.
So what were the letters from Canada saying?
Well, what a great place it was, and how different it was, and so on, and it was bright and sparkling. Jerry was an engineer, civil engineer, and he rapidly got a job, and there was all the construction that was going on at that time in the 50s. So he was in great demand and had no problems. Beryl went to work in Eaton's, I think. And so they were writing these stories about Canada, so I thought, that's where I want to go. So my former girlfriend, Shirley, found out I was going to Canada, so she decided that was a good idea. So she came back and said, let's get married. So dummy me, I got married. We decided to get married, and we got married, and the local Anglican church, and came to Canada in April of 1954.
And you crossed over on a boat?
We came over on a ship, yeah, the SS Samaria. It was his last journey. They scrapped the boat after that, and no matter what they said, it wasn't my fault. It was quite exciting. It was about a 5-day crossing of the Atlantic to reach the St. Lawrence. And I discovered duty-free booze. A shot of scotch was about 15 cents, I think.
Wow.
I think it was a shilling, which is the equivalent of a British shilling, which was the equivalent of about 15 cents, 20 cents or something like that. And that was good scotch. That was Johnny Walker Black. And the other interesting incident on the ship was that my brand new wife, we'd been married 4 months at that time, met up with this guy from Denmark on the boat and had an affair with him on the ship. Jeez, can't win for losing. And
you stayed married?
Yeah, we stayed married. We went to Toronto, and Beryl and Jerry had found us a place in Toronto, a little apartment. And she had a job because she was working for the Gestetner Company, the duplicating machine people in London. So they just transferred her to their Toronto branch. So she had a job to go to. I had to tramp the streets for about 3 weeks before I found a job in a printing firm. And it was about the end of 1954 that she finally pulled the plug and said that she was leaving with this guy. So I was on my own with a bunch of debts because based on 2 salaries, we'd gone into a joint agreement in an apartment, because rents even then in the 1950s were terribly expensive in Toronto. And we'd gone in with another couple with an apartment, and we were paying half the rent each, and so with 2 salaries, and we had to buy some furniture, and so with 2 salaries it was manageable. And I got the furniture we had on terms, you know, paying so much a month. Then when she took off, I'm stuck with just 1 salary, and I had all of a sudden these debts. So I had to scratch it for for a while there, for a few months. And then my mum and dad decided to come over on vacation, and they'd heard about, all these stories about Canada. So they came on vacation, and Beryl and Jerry and my mum and dad and I, and Stan and Jean too, I think, we all took off for this place on the Lake of Bays, which is in the Muskoka area, just north of Muskoka, north of Lake Simcoe. And it was a beautiful spot. And while I was there, I was fiddling around doing something. And the guy was, he had a lot of garden there. He's a bit of a farm. And the place had been a working farm since about the 1900s. And but it was running as a tourist resort now. It had these cabins, and they were very well equipped. And he offered me a job. $50 a month and my food too. So I thought, well, that's better than I've got right now. So I took it, and I moved up there. Stan and Jean weren't too pleased because they had to pay my half of the rent. But I just had to pay off my furniture debts and this sort of thing, so I did. And I worked up there for the rest of that summer. Unfortunately, he just ran out of work. There was nothing for me in the winter. There was nothing in Huntsville or anything like that around there, although we looked around. So I came back to Toronto and took a temporary job with the unemployment insurance for the winter and as a temporary clerk. And then finally, there was a Piccadilly Club. There was a club that was started by this English guy, Gerald Peters. And I joined this club. It was a social thing, and a lot of Brits there. So I joined, and eventually I ended up working there, running the snack bar. And I did that for a while, but I was working too many hours. I replaced two people. So I was working both shifts, like a morning and an evening shift, and it was a little much. So my dad was back in construction by this time, and he was working up at Elliott Lake, building the town site at Elliott Lake, which was famous for its uranium mines. And he came home to visit, and he looked at me, and he said, "My God, you're green." He said, "You're so pale and everything." And I went down because I wasn't eating properly. I weighed about 130 pounds. And he says, "Come back with me, and you need fresh air." So I went to Elliott Lake with him. And the money was very, very good. We worked from dawn till dusk, 7 days a week.
Doing what?
We were only building the town site. And what we were doing, we were working for Storm Construction that was putting in the sewers and water mains. So again, we were digging trenches with a backhoe. And
so in your backhoe, you dig a trench, and Granddad would dig.
No, I was working with him as his, they call him a greaser or an oiler, and spare driver sort of thing. So what I would do, I would make sure that all the cog wheels and all that were greased every morning. I would have to do that, and oil the various wheels and the pulleys and stuff like that. Do all the maintenance on the thing. And as the weather got colder, and it did get cold up there quite quickly, by November there was a lot of snow on the ground and a lot of frost. And this was a diesel engine, and you had to swing it to start it. It didn't have a self-starter. You had to swing it to start it. And trying to swing this thing on a very cold morning, oh boy. But we found a few tricks. He showed me a couple of tricks to do this. And I drove some of the time just to give him a break, because like I say, it was an awfully long day. And we used to get breakfast During the summer, we were having breakfast at 5 o'clock in the morning, come back to the camp, we were living in this camp, for noon for lunch, and then be out again until 7 o'clock at night when you came back for supper. Then if it was still daylight, you'd go out and do another 2 or 3 hours work.
Well, yeah.
So it was a long day on these. Mind you, the food was great. It wasn't the best cooking in the world, but it was great. You could have as much as you wanted. I mean, I've sat down and eaten, 4 or 5 pork chops and a great mound of mashed potatoes and vegetables and stuff, And I'd have every night they had a different pie for dessert, and I would have an entire pie. I guess for my dessert, because I was been starving myself, and all of a sudden my stomach was expanding, and I was doing this outdoor work, heavy physical work,
Yeah.
and I couldn't be filled up.
So were there any points when you had moved to Canada, when you were kind of, looking for work or trying to figure out what you were going to do, and that you had regretted leaving the UK?
I think at first there was always that the comparison with the UK. We don't do it like that back home, kind of stuff. But really, it didn't last. One of the things I did was join the reserves, the Canadian Army Reserves, with the Toronto Scottish Regiment. And so I got to meet a good bunch of people, and I got promoted in that. But when we came back from Elliott Lake, because in the winter time it froze completely down to about 8-foot level, and we just couldn't work. The ground was just rock hard, and because it's all muskeg, basically.
What's that?
Well, it's just a combination of dirt and water, it's a waterlogged dirt, and it just froze. And we couldn't work, so we got laid off. We came back, and I went back to the Piccadilly Club and was talking to somebody there, and there was a guy named King. I can't remember his first name. But he worked for the CBC, and he said they're hiring at the CBC, so I went along and got the job as an assistant film editor. And that was in 1957. And I started there January 1957. And worked my way up to a senior film assistant. I actually was running a department for a while. Then I transferred to the newsroom there, and I really liked working in the newsroom because that was really pressure there. The other stuff was mundane, working on feature films and that sort of thing. And everything was on film. There was no videotape in those days. Everything was on film or kinescope. And so I worked in the film editing there and learned to pick up some speed when I was in the newsroom. And I worked there for about 4 years, 57 to 1961, January 61. So it was almost exactly 4 years. In the meantime, licenses were granted for more private English language stations. And there was a new one opening up in Montreal, and one of our senior editors, Molly Olson, took a job there as the supervisor of film editing. So she had to staff the place. There was a brand new station starting up. So she phoned Toronto and talked to some of the people there, and I was one of them, and went up there for an interview and got a job working in Montreal. Made the decision. It was at least $1,000 a year more, because they were anxious to get people. They were paying over the odds to get people to go and work there, give up their steady jobs, to go and work there. And I regretted that sometimes, because it was the people we were working with. I was back in the news again, in the news department. But unfortunately, the reporters and the writers working in the news department had never worked in television before. So they had no idea how to write to film, or, I'd give them shot list. You'd cut the story, make a shot list out, give them the shot list, and they say, well, what's this for? I say, well, that tells you what shot comes at what place, at what time, and you write the script accordingly. Oh, I've never done that before. Well, that's what you have to do if the guy's going to read it and make sense,
So in that day, it was the old style where the film editor kind of dictated a little bit of the chronology of the.
Of the story, yes,
Yeah.
unless it was something that was, particularly the reporter came back and said, I want this,
Yeah.
you know, this, so
Or you
and
have
so.
a discussion or whatever.
And you say, okay, well, you know, yeah, sure, okay, we can work that out. And most of the cameramen were fairly new to the business too. They'd been still photographers before, and they picked up a Bell and Howell 16 millimeter and were told to go out and shoot. You know, so some of the footage we'd get back, and oh my God, you know. And but we worked around it and worked together. The news director, Bert Cannings, was a character. He was an old newspaper man to start with, and he'd been in radio for umpty 8 years. He was in his 60s then, I guess, but he was one of the old style editors, you know, and he used to run around with the press in his hat, you know. You can imagine him in the 20s, you know. But he was a hell of a newsman, and I learned a lot from him about news stories and what constitutes news stories. And he loved getting people going. Remember, one of my buddies, Derek Lind, who was a reporter, had a flaming row with Bert, and he came out of Bert's office and he picked up his typewriter, which was a heavy old Underwoods, and he threw it through the glass panel in Bert's door, you know. And Bert laughed like crazy. He said, got him going. The guy was nuts. But it was enjoyable there, and worked a lot of shift work, worked a lot of overtime. Montreal was a terribly exciting scene to be in that period. In the 1960s, 1962 saw the birth of the FLQ, mailbox bombings, raids on armories. I transferred from the reserves in Toronto to the reserves in Montreal to the Canadian Grenadier Guards, and I was on sentry duty 2-3 nights a week. And I go to work all day and then go to the armory at night and then go back to work the next day, you know. And then in the mid-60s, there was all the upset about McGill should be a bilingual institution and all this sort of thing. So there was all sorts of French activism was coming into play. The French nationalism was really coming up. And then, of course, 1970 with the kidnapping of James Cross, the British High Commissioner, and Pierre Laporte, a cabinet minister. And we had the troops on the streets and that sort of thing, and that went on for several months until they killed Pierre Laporte. He was murdered, and they kept making threats about James Cross, but finally he was rescued, and they caught the guys, but that was, at least 3 months that dragged on. And we had the press from around the world camping in Montreal. Everyone from BBC to Reuters, to CBS, ABC, NBC, they were all there.
Yeah.
And the stories were going worldwide, and we were working for them. In fact, the day that you were baptized, okay, it was a Sunday, and I'd worked on Saturday so that I would have Sunday off, because it seemed that we was always working weekends, you know. And I'd worked on Saturday specifically to have Sunday off. And we just got back from the church, and there was a lot of people. Grandma and Granddad came up from Toronto, and there was other friends, you know, that we had, and they were all there. And I was opening the first bottle of wine to celebrate, and we had all sorts of snacks and goodies, and the phone rang. And it was my boss, Mike Donegan, wanted me to go into work. And I said, no, I can't. I'm in the middle of a party, you know, I can't come, you know. And I hung up, and he called back about 3 times, and finally it looked like my job was on the line. So I had to go in. There was a guy from NBC. He was there, just a reporter on his own, and he was using footage that our cameraman had shot, but he needed an editor. So I went in to work, and I was miserable. You know, I didn't even change. I went in my best suit and tie and everything, and I never went to work like that. And I was slamming things around, you know, this sort of thing. And finally, he did the job, and he was pleased with it, and fed the whole thing to New York. And afterwards he said, "Does I understand this was your child's baptism?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, take this and buy him a gift from NBC New York." And he gave me $20 US, which was a fair amount of money in those days, you know.
Yeah. I didn't know that story, Dad. That was a good one. It ties to news-wise.
Yeah. So that's how it was, and it was an exciting time to be in, you know. And then later on, right at the end of my career, basically with them, I stayed there until 1991, 1990. So the uprising of the Mohawks, and they blocked the bridges and blockaded highways and that sort of stuff. Mercier Bridge was closed down. We had to go for miles to get around onto the island of Montreal from Chateauguay. We were living in Chateauguay by that time. And
in the 60s, you had Expo as well.
oh yes, there was Expo, and there was the '76 Olympics. You know, all these things were happening in Montreal. It made news. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. You know, I remember Frank Duffy coming to work for us from the East Coast, Senator Frank Duffy, and his aim was to make it to Ottawa.
Oh, Mike Duffy.
Mike Duffy. Who did I say?
You said Frank. Yeah.
Frank Duffy. No, Mike Duffy. Yeah. Frank Duffy was at the Armory. Mike Duffy was. He wanted to get to Ottawa.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "What do you want to go to Ottawa for? It's a dead town. There's nothing happening. There's only politics in Ottawa." But that's what he wanted to get involved in. He wanted to be there, to get into politics. But it was an exciting time. No matter, I remember the Saint Jean Baptiste Parade. Which one was that? That was the year that Trudeau got elected.
68.
68. That was the 68 one. And I was at home. We were at the cottage. Remember our cottage in at the outside of Chateauguay? And I was there, and I was listening to it on CJAD radio about all this riot that had broken out at the parade as it was going past the saluting base, and they were throwing stones and rocks at all the dignitaries in the seats, and Trudeau was refusing to leave and this sort of stuff. And I was pacing up and down, and Mummy said to me, "Oh, for God's sake, go to work." So I jumped in the car and I took off. 10 minutes after I left, the phone rang, and she just picked it up and said, "He's on his way." They were calling me. And I ended up working right through till about 8 o'clock the next morning, doing stories and feeding it to the world. And I almost got one kid into trouble because I made this shot. You know, it was just footage. The footage was coming in, just pouring into us. And we were going on CTV National News that night. I didn't get the footage in my hands until about 10:30, and we go into air. They wanted about 3 minutes, and we go into air at 11. And I threw a whole bunch of stuff together, and I made one cut, one edit. There was this random shot of a kid with a big rock in his hands, and he was throwing the rock, and I made this beautiful cut to Pierre Trudeau ducking like this. And the next day, the cops came in and they wanted to see all our footage, and they saw this shot and they wanted to get the details of this kid. I said, "No, he's just a random shot. He wasn't the one that threw the rock." I said it was just poetic license. That's all it was, you know. Just trying to make the thing look good, you know. But there was a lot of injuries. There was one policeman that had acid or something thrown in his face, and somebody else grabbed a traffic sign and broke somebody else's leg and all this. So there was a lot.
There's a vicious side.
There was a real vicious side to it, yeah. And the cops was running wild with their batons and so on. And so that started another summer of unrest, you know, after that. And there was the Berry Street bus fire, where the Berry bus terminal, they put on buses and banned taxis from the airport. And the taxi drivers were livid, okay? So they were barricading the Berry Street bus terminal to stop the buses from running out to the airport. And some guys, one of the bus drivers, I don't know who it was, someone inside the garage found himself a rifle and started shooting at the crowd. So they started throwing Molotov cocktails in there, and the whole thing went up in flames.
Oh my God.
And then the crowd would not let the firemen through.
Wow.
The firemen were standing there with their hoses in their hands, and they couldn't do anything because the crowd just wouldn't let them.
So did anybody die?
No, nobody died, but it was so on. You know, there was this sort of stuff going on all the time, and it was exciting. It really was to be in that field. You know, that sort of doing that sort of work.
Well, I guess it rubbed off on me, did it? So,
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I remember taking you in there and showing you around, and then when I became a supervisor and a manager, I was put in charge of finding recruits to do the runners for the elections. Remember,
yeah.
when the elections were all paper things and had to be before they got electronic and on computerized and all that sort of thing.
That's good.
And what made me bitter was that you got, I think, $50 for rehearsal and $100 for the actual telecast, and I was management, and I had to work, and I didn't get paid. I just got my salary, you know, no matter what I did, I just got my salary. But
Tell me about the first time you met Mummy.
well, the first time I met Mummy, I hadn't been at CFCF very long, a couple of months, I guess. No, it must have been a little later than that because must have been in May. And who was it? Bill Callender came in to the office and he said, John Miller. He spoke to John Miller that he had this girlfriend that he was dating, and she had this party on, and she was supposed to get a date for her girlfriend. So he asked John Miller, and John Miller said yes. So the girl was fixed up with a date. Then at the last minute, John chickened out and wouldn't go. So Bill came to me and said, you know, no, it was John Shelters. That's who it wasn't Bill Cannon. John Shelters. He was going out with Martha Smith, who was a VON nurse like Mummy.
Oh, who lived in our building on Tilden, right?
Yeah, she lived next door. Yeah, and we went down to their place in Prince Edward Island with their parents when you were a kid. Remember it?
I do.
The first time we went down there. Anyway, so we went to this party, and it was at their cottage in Saint Genevieve, and it was a crowded. There was all sorts of people. There was this summer crowd and everything there, and Beverly's brother was there, and his brother's wife, and so on.
Oh, so Uncle Stuart and
Uncle
Mary
Stu-
were there.
Yeah, they were there because they were living close by at that time. I think they were living in NGG. And I didn't see much of Mummy, you know. So finally we sort of got together, and then we were having a drink, and she said, I apologize for not seeing much of her, not spending much time with you tonight. I said, well, these things happen. She said, well, maybe it'll go better next time. So I said, okay, that suits me. So we made arrangements for another date, and after that we were dating fairly regularly through the rest of that year, and I think we got engaged that winter or in the fall. I think we got engaged in the fall of that year, and we got married. That was 1961, and we got married 7th of July 1962.
Wow. So you met her in the summer of '61.
Yeah, it was at the beginning of the summer, the spring, and I think they just opened up their cottage at the beginning of May. And so we got married in the following year, in 7th of July, not the 7th of June, 7th of July, and went down to Popham Beach for our honeymoon. Went back there the following year for a vacation, and went there 3 or 4 times. And we took you a couple of times. Remember the old fort that was there? Remember the beach that was there? It was a beautiful beach they had there along the river and out to the ocean. But boy, that river was cold.
I just remember really cold.
Yeah.
I remember remember throwing a plastic fish in the ocean, and you sold me when you come back, and I thought I could catch it with the plastic fishing rod that it came with. And
Yeah.
it never came back. So,
Yeah.
that.
But Ann and Gary Cormack came and had a vacation with us, and so did John and Shirley Krug.
Yeah. well, maybe because there's just pictures of it. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
If I remember, because there's pictures, but it was Uncle Gary and Auntie Anne.
Yeah. I got this photograph at home, I think. I don't believe I brought it, but of Mummy and Auntie Anne sitting on the steps of our little cottage, and they're both smoking pipes.
I've seen that one. Yeah.
Yeah. They were just doing it to show off, you know. So I progressed with CFCF. I became supervisor, I think, in 76. We moved out to Chateauguay in 73. And the bridge was still bad at that time because it was only single lane in each direction. It was not 1976 for the Olympics that they before the Olympics they made it into 2 lanes.
They built that extra span.
Built that extra span for the Olympics. They were building that for quite a while. I mean, it must have taken them at least 6 years to build that, but it was basically ready for the Olympics.
Is traffic coming in from the U.S. or is that?
Well, yeah, but they had to sort of do something about it because there was so much traffic. That was an hour and a half to cross the Mercier Bridge every single night.
Wow. Yeah.
I didn't mind because I was working mostly shift work, and I was going in late in the morning or about lunchtime and coming home 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So I was out of the traffic all the time. And then 1973, I was made the senior editor and put on a regular shift. In 1976, I took over as the departmental manager. And, or actually supervisor. I wasn't the manager at that time. It was a little bit later they gave me manager status. I was a supervisor and on regular shifts, so I was darn glad that they were able to build that extra span because man, that would have created havoc. But I was busy in the reserves too, and
there was Karen that came.
And then Karen came along in 73.
73,
yeah. Yeah, and we had the summer with her. We at the cottage. We got her just before we left our apartment in NDG on Fielding. And we moved out to the cottage. And do you remember Vaughan and his wife? Yeah, Vaughan Gentle, and he's from Australia, and his son and his wife. And they took over our apartment for a little while until they bought a house, and then she passed away the next year, I think. She had cancer. But we moved out to the cottage, I think a week early, so they could have our apartment. And we took Karen with us. She was only a few weeks old, about 2.5 months old or something like that. So we had her out of the cottage, but then you were going to be 5. And so we figured that we'd better get settled down, and you're going to be 5 at the end of May, so we better get settled down and find a place to live where there's a school.
Did you find a place?
So that's when we found the house on Fielding, on Woodbine.
Yeah.
And moved in there in September of 73. 73, was it 74?
It was 74.
It was 74, yes, you're right, it was 74. Yeah, we had 1 year with Karen at the apartment, that's right, we did. 1 year with Karen at the apartment when she was sharing your bedroom. And then in 74 we moved to the house, and you started school at Jobber. And joined St. George's Church, and then Mummy got you in Beavers, and that was a mistake because by that time I was Regimental Sergeant Major at the Grenadier Guards, and I was coming to the end of my term, so we made a mistake in going to clean-up day at Powers Court, and we were the only parents there. All the rest were leaders, and so they sort of glommed in on me. Oh yeah, he's a handy guy, and next thing you know, I was recruited into scouting.
Never looked back.
Never looked back. 37 years I did in scouting.
Wow. It's a long time. Well, there's
Yeah.
still lots of people that remember you as their leader, as Akela.
Yeah, it's amazing, and
So
even
what,
even parents.
yeah. So what do you think, because your scouting career was so long and so big, what did you enjoy about it?
I enjoyed the kids, and I enjoyed program planning. I enjoyed making up programs, and I tried very, very hard to make them unusual and work in new things. I like to get guest people to come in, sort of people to come and visit. And I remember bringing in Mac, what was his name? He was your headmaster at Jobber. And his wife worked at the Mackay Center.
Mm-hmm.
She was a teacher at the Mackay Center, and I had her come one night and teach everybody sign language.
Mm.
And all the kids learned to sign their own name and say, do your best or something in sign language,
Mm-hmm.
And it was things like that that I tried to mix it up a little bit and use as many elements as I could in the program.
Mm-hmm.
And I insisted on doing outdoor stuff. And I enjoyed that. And it got to be a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. Sometimes I think that I was doing it as an ego thing, but well, maybe I was. But it turned some good stuff out. Whether it was for my own ego or not. I was pleased when the kids enjoyed it and made a lot of friends and met kids. Oh, for years afterwards, I'd bump into somebody in the shopping centre. Oh, hi, Akela. And I look at this kid, he's sort of like he's 17 or 18 years old and 6 inches taller than I am.
Yeah,
Who the hell are you? Last time I saw you, you were 9.
yeah. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, so that sort of thing. Then I got into the higher echelons, became district commissioner, and I got into training. And again, I enjoyed that aspect of training, of trying to make the training interesting, trying to sparkle it up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing the same when I was in the reserves,
Mm-hmm.
when I was doing training the troops. I tried to lighten it up a bit, and make it a little more, come up with something that's a little more unusual, a little bit more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
And because that was the challenge, it was the same old thing over and over again, just repeating it, it get boring. And that's the thrill I got out of it, was coming up with something new and seeing the kids' faces light up.
Mm-hmm.
The first time a bunch of kids got to cook a grilled cheese sandwich on a tin can with a candle underneath or something
Mm-hmm.
like that,
Mm-hmm.
or a tin, make a little fire of sticks and put a tin can with holes punched in it,
Yeah,
and fry an egg on the top or something like that, See their faces,
yeah.
wow, look what I did,
Yeah.
I made my lunch.
Kids do love that now that I have, I guess, Christina and Alex, and with Daniel too. They just want to learn and see.
Yeah, they
do
soak it
as
up like
much-
sponges, yeah,
Do as much as you can. So.
Yeah. I was never short of kids to want to join my pack. I mean, I used to have 36, 38 kids in my pack most of the time when I was at Jobber School. No, it's Mary Gardner. Mary Gardner. Yeah. And that was the heyday, I guess, of scouting, because now there's so many other things going on in the community, and there goes other pursuits, and
Yeah.
it's not going as well these days.
So, Dad, we're probably almost we've been 49 minutes on this tape. So
Wow,
It's been
okay.
like about almost 2 hours today.
Oh my
so
goodness.
I think it's much more, but maybe I'll just sort of wrap it up in the last 10 minutes here with.
Yeah, sure. Just
Here we are in Prague, and
Yeah.
I guess now here I'm over in Europe, and you have 3 grandchildren in Europe that were born
Yeah.
over here. What's it like to be? Because you resisted going back to the UK for so long, or there was just, you were busy with your family, and what's it like to sort of be over here and kind of
Well,
see everything?
It's great to travel. I discovered that going back to Britain, and then when we went to Spain and Edinburgh and places like that. It was, I discovered it's really great to travel and see other places, and I'd never always visited it. Mummy always wanted to travel. She wanted to go to Mediterranean countries. I wouldn't mind going to the northern countries somehow, Norway, Denmark, this sort of thing. But we never did get off the ground. We made sort of tentative plans, but they never came through. There was always something going on. And I just, you taught me that, to go and see things and try new things. I think I've tried more things since I've been hooked up with you in Quebec City, or, and some of those guys there and different things there, and then coming over to Europe and seeing different sites. And I thank you for that. It's really been great. You've taught me that at my time of life I can still learn and enjoy and experience things.
Well, thanks for the British passport.
It comes in handy.
That's one of the reasons.
Yeah. But no, it's things, I suppose, are winding down, although I don't really feel like it. I do take things easier these days. I don't get involved quite so much at the church. I very seldom go down to the armory now. Everyone wants to buy me drinks, and that's a bit of a no-no. So I haven't been to the mess dinner for the last 3 years, the Remembrance Day dinner. One of the reasons is cost. It's $120 they're charging now for a dinner.
Well, yeah.
They provide the wine and everything, but
Yeah.
I just go there that's an evening out, and $120.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot of money, and I'm not going to be drinking.
Yeah.
So I'll go there and watch everyone get shit-faced, and but and at church now, I do my share of things there, but if I don't feel like going in this Sunday, I don't.
Yeah.
I turn over and go back to sleep, have a sleep in, So I am taking things a little easier, but it's getting harder to keep up with the house and the garden and everything, and I have to think seriously about smartening the whole place up and putting it on the market.
Yeah, well, I guess that's one of our projects in
Yeah.
a little while, although it doesn't seem to be quieting down for me anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And you've got a family, you've got to take care of them, and you've got to...
Yeah, but
live
I
with
think
them.
I'll have to book a week at some point here or there,
Yeah.
where I can just go over.
Like I say, we had these, Shirley and I had these Vimy plans for next year, and I don't know whether we're going to be able to make it. She's not all that mobile. Her leg is really acting up, and her bad knee, where she had with the knee cap replaced and all this sort of thing, and it's still acting up, and she's in a lot of pain with that. I don't walk as fast as I did, and certainly not uphill or down upstairs as fast as I did.
Mm-hmm.
Although I've been getting better. I've noticed, just walking home from your place tonight.
Well, yeah.
Did it?
Yeah. You'd be surprised how
Yeah.
much just walking around.
Just walking around does, yeah. But to do a 15-day trip or something like that, where you're doing a lot of traveling and walking from here to there and all that sort of thing, I don't know how much of it we can take. I have to think about it. I'm going to have to talk to her about it. And
Yeah.
I know it'd be a great thing to do regimentally and all this sort of thing, although none of the veterans will be going.
Yeah.
They're all gone.
Yeah.
There aren't any veterans. If I go over, I could be one of the oldest guys going.
Yeah.
But no, I just got to, the future is still bright. I've got things that are wrong medically, but they're all being taken care of. And that's it. And I feel reasonable. Thank goodness, I'm okay up here.
It's true, Dad. You actually for you look and you act and think much longer than a lot of people. So,
Yeah. You know, I've senior moments,
yeah.
you know, but I can't think of a name or something, you know.
But that's even for me right now. Just I can't even remember Alex's name. I like Alex, Chris.
You start going through the litany.
Yeah, like it's just I'm swelled. But okay, Dad. Well, thanks so much. You know, if you had to sum everything up in your life as kind of some of the things that you learned that you would pass on, if you had to kind of wrap it all up as things that maybe you enjoyed the most, or words of wisdom, or whatever it is that
I have to say, stay young. And a good way of staying young is associating with young people. Like I found, it was a couple of years, I was the camp director at Camp Jackson Dodds, and all that staff were mostly in their late teens, very early 20s. I think the next oldest to me was 23 years old, you know. And I had 2 great summers with them, and we're still friends, and they invite me out to places, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
They say, well, we're all having a get-together at so-and-so's place, you know.
Yeah.
And some of them married and got kids now, but they still invite me because I thoroughly enjoyed working with them, and they enjoyed working with me because I try to think like they did. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is, it's never too late.
Well, that's good to know. That's
You
good.
know, it's no matter how old you are, you can start something new. I really started traveling in my 70s.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah.
And that's when I started traveling, and that's when I, really took on a whole new view of the world.
Yeah, that's true, I guess.
Learned to speak a few words of Czech, saying
Yeah.
"Dobry den."
Yeah, that's...
People prosím.
Yeah, people prosím, that's a good one to know.
But that sort of thing, and trying things out, and being a little more daring, and that sort of thing. And so it's never too late. You don't think if you think you're over the hill, you're going to be over the hill. But
Well, that's good advice for me, Dad, because I'm feeling old these days.
yeah, I know. I didn't think I was going to last past 55. I just had a feeling that 55 was going to be the end.
Well,
And boy, it wasn't. It wasn't to be. And there's been a couple of narrow escapes and in accidents and things. And I think that, guy upstairs hasn't finished with me yet. There's something for me to do, maybe. I don't know what it is, but
84 is the new 64.
yeah, that's the way I look at it. Yeah, I wish that were true. I wish I was 64 again. Anyway,
Great. Okay, well, Dad, thanks a lot.
thank you for that.